Hello class, welcome to a home reading lesson. Today's lesson is one more in the series of the lessons devoted to the classical American literature. We are going to deal with the short story A Day's Wait, written by Ernest Hemingway. This lesson takes you through a step-by-step analysis of the story. The analysis has been done on the plot, setting, type of narration, themes, and characterization. First of all, I would like to introduce you to the objectives of this particular lesson. At the end of the lesson, you will be able to know briefly about the life of Ernest Hemingway and relate it with the story A Day's Wait. Understand the different elements of analysis of a short story. Summarize the story and critically appreciate it. Give answers to the questions asked from the story. To appreciate the story in a better way, it is good to know something about the life of the author. Hemingway Ernest, a prominent American novelist and short story writer. He began to write fiction about 1923, his first books being the reflection of his war experience. The Sun Also Rises belongs to this period as well as A Farewell to Arms, in which the anti-war protest is particularly powerful. During the Civil War, Hemingway visited Spain as a war correspondent. His impressions of the period and his sympathies with Republicans found reflection in his famous play, The Fifth Column, the novel For Whom the Bell Tolls, and a number of short stories. His later works Across the River and Into the Trees, and The Old Man in the Sea, and the very last novel Islands in the Stream, published after the author's death. In 1954, he was awarded a Nobel Prize for Literature. Hemingway lived a life full of adventures. Besides being one of the world's loved writers, Hemingway was a fan of bullfighting, a hunter and a fisherman. He participated in both world wars. Many of his novels and short stories are based on his experience during wartime. It is believed by many critics that the suffering of his central characters is just what Hemingway has suffered, such as the wounds from the wars, insomnia, and strong frustrations. The story A Day's Wait also has an autobiographical element. While Hemingway was living in France, his son was down with fever and behaved similarly to the 9-year-old boy in the story. A slice-of-life story is a depiction of a mundane event that happens in a person's life, which looks insignificant but has far-reaching implications. The American boy, his name was Schatz, thought that he was going to die. These thoughts were based on the fact that his temperature was 102 and he heard from his schoolmates in France that people can't live with a temperature of 44 degrees or more. In fact, he was healthy. He was just used to another scale for measuring temperature. He used Fahrenheit instead of Celsius. This mistake revealed that autosuggestion is essential. Being sure that he was really ill, Schatz felt and behaved accordingly. Schatz displayed also some good features of his character. He was brave facing death in the near future as he thought. And now, I want you to watch a video based on this beautiful story.
day's wait. He came into the room to shut the windows while we were still in bed, and I saw he looked ill. He was shivering, his face was white, and he walked slowly as though it ached to move. "What's the matter, Schatz?" "I've got a headache." "You better go back to bed." "No, I'm all right." "You go to bed. I'll see you when I'm dressed." But when I came downstairs, he was dressed, sitting by the fire, looking a very sick and miserable boy of 9 years. When I put my hand on his forehead, I knew he had a fever. "You go up to bed," I said. "You're sick." "I'm all right," he said. When the doctor came, he took the boy's temperature. "What is it?" I asked him. 102. Downstairs, the doctor left 3 different medicines in different colored capsules with instructions for giving them. One was to bring down the fever, another a purgative, the third to overcome an acid condition. "The germs of influenza can only exist in an acid condition," he explained. He seemed to know all about influenza and said there was nothing to worry about if the fever did not go above 104 degrees. This was a light epidemic of flu, and there was no danger if you avoided pneumonia. Back in the room, I wrote the boy's temperature down and made a note of the time to give the various capsules. "Do you want me to read to you?" "All right, if you want to," said the boy. His face was very white, and there were dark areas under his eyes. He lay still in the bed and seemed very detached from what was going on. I read aloud from Howard Pyle's Book of Pirates, but I could see he was not following what I was reading. "How do you feel, Schatz?" I asked him. "Just the same, so far," he said. I sat at the foot of the bed and read to myself while I waited for it to be time to give another capsule. It would have been natural for him to go to sleep, but when I looked up, he was looking at the foot of the bed, looking very strangely. "Why don't you try to go to sleep? I'll wake you up for the medicine." "I'd rather stay awake." After a while, he said to me, "You don't have to stay in here with me, Papa, if it bothers you." "Doesn't bother me." "No, I mean, you don't have to stay if it's going to bother you." I thought perhaps he was a little light-headed, and after giving him the prescribed capsules at 11 o'clock, I went out for a while. It was a bright, cold day, the ground covered with a sleet that had frozen, so that it seemed as if all the bare trees, the bushes, the cut brush, and all the grass in the bare ground had been varnished with ice. I took the young Irish setter for a little walk up the road and along a frozen creek, but it was difficult to stand or walk on the glassy surface, and the red dog slipped and slithered, and I fell twice, hard, once dropping my gun and having it slide away over the ice. We flushed a covey of quail under a high clay bank with overhanging brush, and I killed 2 as they went out of sight over the top of the bank. Some of the covey lit in trees, but most of them scattered into brush piles, and it was necessary to jump on the ice-coated mounds of brush several times before they would flush. Coming out while you were poised unsteadily on the icy, springy brush, they made difficult shooting, and I killed 2, missed 5, and started back, pleased to have found a covey close to the house, and happy there were so many left to find on another day. At the house, they said the boy had refused to let anyone come into the room. "You can't come in," he said. "You mustn't get what I have." I went up to him and found him in exactly the position I had left him, white-faced, but with the tops of his cheeks flushed by the fever, staring still as he had stared at the foot of the bed. I took his temperature. "What is it?" "Something like 100, I said. It was 102 4/10. "It was 102, he said. "Who said so?" "The doctor." "Your temperature is all right," I said. "It's nothing to worry about." "I don't worry," he said, "but I can't keep from thinking." "Don't think," I said. "Just take it easy." "I'm taking it easy," he said, and looked straight ahead. He was evidently holding tight onto himself about something. "Take this with water." "Do you think it will do any good?" "Of course it will." I sat down and opened the pirate book and commenced to read, but I could see he was not following, so I stopped. "About what time do you think I'm going to die?" he asked. "What?" "About how long will it be before I die?" "You aren't going to die. What's the matter with you?" "Yes, I am. I heard him say 102. People don't die with a fever of 102. That's a silly way to talk. I know they do. At school in France, the boys told me you can't live with 44 degrees. I've got 102. He had been waiting to die all day, ever since 9 o'clock in the morning. You poor Schatz, I said. Poor old Schatz. It's like miles and kilometers. You aren't going to die. That's a different thermometer. On that thermometer, 37 is normal. On this kind, it's 98. Are you sure? Absolutely, I said. It's like miles and kilometers. You know, like how many kilometers we make when we do 70 miles in the car? Oh, he said. But his gaze at the foot of the bed relaxed slowly. The hold over himself relaxed too, finally. And the next day it was very slack, and he cried very easily at little things that were of no importance. A day's wait.
And now we move to an analysis of the story. Time to review each element. Setting of the story. The story is set in autumn or early winter because of the ice on the ground. It opens in the early morning, continues throughout the day, and ends the next day. The story takes place in the dark room of a house, and the hunting scene is set in countryside in America. The weather outside is cold, which heightens the mood of the story, which is called less serious. The type of narration. The short story is written in the first-person narrator from the father's point of view. Hemingway uses this narrative perspective to build tension in the short story. In the story, prevail dialogues between the little boy and his father, from which it is obvious that there is an invisible wall between father and son. They talk about two different things, the father about the illness and the son about his death, but they don't know that they misunderstand each other. This fateful misunderstanding manifests itself in different scenes where the father and son talk about this, meaning two different things. As for the theme, in A Day's Wait by Ernest Hemingway, we have the theme of fear, courage, responsibility, isolation, confusion, acceptance, and control. Idea of the story is, while a person's being strong for others is noble, it sometimes causes that person more problems. The genre of the story is realistic fiction, which the events that occurred in the story isn't true, but they may happen in real life. There are two main characters in Hemingway's A Day's Wait. The narrator, the father is called Papa by his son. The son, a boy of 9, is called Schatz by his father. Schatz is a 9-year-old boy. He is young and innocent. It looks weird that he is afraid but calm in the situation that he thought he would die. Schatz returns back to his normal life after the father reveals the fault. He cried about unimportant things like before. The father of Schatz. He is spending time with his son so long as he remains sick. The father reads for him. After being told that you can't live with 44 degrees, Schatz's dad tells his son that it's like miles and kilometers. You aren't going to die. That's a different thermometer. Let's look at the structure of the story. The story begins with that the narrator notices one morning that his 9-year-old son is ill. A doctor visits the home and notes that the boy's temperature is 102. After the doctor leaves, the boy seems strangely detached and refuses to go to sleep. Development of the story. After the medication and his dad reading the Book of Pirates to him, Schatz is still not feeling well. Culmination of the story. Schatz becomes very worried about his 102 degrees of temperature. He thinks he is going to die. The last element of our analysis is solution of the story. Schatz finds out that his fever isn't as bad as he thought it was. A French boy told him that he can't live with a 44-degree fever. He was using metric measurements instead of US measurements. So, in general, the text isn't very complicated and rather clear for understanding. Do you agree with me? Your home task will be to answer the multiple choice questions. That's all for today. I hope the lesson was interesting and useful for you. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.